That's what you heard before, I'm sorry. So that was kind of playing it again. Okay, here comes the new one. What shutter speed was that? You guys getting your own answers? Write them down. I like the iPad. Everyone should have those in this class. So you have, is that 2 seconds? Okay, what do you have? 1 second? 4 seconds? Half a second? We got some winners over here. Half second. Let's listen up. Now, to be fair, each camera has its own unique shutter sound. So this is a camera that you may not own and be as familiar with. Your camera will have a different sound. Let's do one last one. All right, here we go. See what you got. You got to be really sensitive, and maybe I'm getting too picky here, but I like learning all the different angles. All right, so what do our chat hosts have to say? You guys have personal guesses on that one? Let's see how good they are.
60th of a second.
60th?
I was going to go with 30th.
Okay. What about the rest of the group here? We got a 15th here. Anybody else? 30th? 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 15th? So you guys are getting better because it was 15th. And hopefully it'll go here. Let's see. Oh, it didn't do it. I'm sorry. But it was a 15th of a second. So nice job. All right, so let's see what we got here. Depth of field. So we're moving on. Formula for depth of field. All right, so how much depth of field are you going to get in any particular scene? Depth of field extends 1/3 in front and 2/3 behind the plane of focus. So if you focus on something, 1/3 of it is in front, 2/3 of it is behind it. All right? And this is going to lead us to something called, one of the cooler terms, hyperfocal distance. All right? Hyperfocal distance is technically the distance to achieve the maximum depth of field. So it's the basic question of, I want all this stuff in focus. Where should I exactly focus the lens? Do I focus on infinity? Do I focus on what's close up, halfway in between? Where exactly should I focus? And this is going to vary according to everything that controls focusing. The focal length, the aperture, and of course the subject's distance. So this is going to vary tremendously depending upon the setup of your camera. So let's do a little setup with this. All right, so 1/3 in front, 2/3 behind. Imagine that we are focused on the number 10 on this yardstick at a very wide open aperture. Doesn't really matter what aperture at this point, just a very wide aperture. And in this general idea here, we're focused at, we have the 9 in focus in front, so that's 1 inch. That means we get 2 inches in back in focus. If we were to change an aperture, it might grow a little bit, maybe 1 inch in front and 2 inches in back. Change the aperture again, it grows a little bit more. And we change it all the way down to f/22, it grows a whole lot. All right? Now, if we want to get as much in focus as possible here, you'll notice that the background isn't quite in focus here. If we want to get the background in focus to as close as we can get, what should we do? Well, here's what we shouldn't do. Focus our lens on infinity. So you don't want to focus on the other side of the Grand Canyon if you want a lot of things in focus, because you can see we've kind of lost that depth of field behind the focusing part. Here's what we want to do. This is where we were. Here's where we are at this very small aperture. We're going to move the depth of field back just far enough so that the back end of it reaches towards the back end of wherever that may be. And so this is the theory of how it works in the lab. And so out in the field, it gets to be a little bit tough. Because when you say focus 1/3 into the scene, well, what does 1/3 of infinity mean? You know, because you want to have the far distance in focus. What's 1/3 of that? Well, it varies from situation to situation, but it's a technique that landscape photographers will use if you don't have a tilt-shift lens in order to get something in the foreground in focus and something in the background. Now, when I shot this picture down in Zion, I didn't have anything to really focus on, because if I focused here, the depth of field wasn't enough to carry it through back here. If I focused here, it wouldn't carry through here. And this is when you have to turn off autofocusing. And you have to manually focus here, okay? You manually focus out there, and you focus somewhere in between. So I'm focusing on this invisible point that I would estimate might be 15 or 20 feet out in the air. And so you just kind of go back and forth. And this one, it kind of pays to have a nice focusing ring. You can see the scales. You can set it there. Good manual focus lens is nice to have, or good features on it. Something close in the foreground, clear in the background. And I'm focusing somewhere out there, maybe on the archway of Mesa Arch here. And so in some cases, I prefer to manual focus in these cases. Now I could pick an area to autofocus. I'm not going to focus down here with my focusing point. I might focus, in this case, right about the center of the frame to get all of that in focus. This is a great technique when you're shooting verticals. That way you can have something kind of right at your feet, looking up to something that's in the distance. So a very useful technique. Do have a little bit of time. Make sure your camera's on a tripod for this in most cases. Should we jump to questions, or should I continue on? Because I got, I think, one final section.
We have about 20 minutes before the end, so do you want to continue on, and we'll have
just
questions
end
at
up
the end?
we'll just fill it up with
Yep.
questions. Okay,
Great.
so the last little section, funny, it wasn't in the show about 24 hours ago, but I realized that I had promised that I would talk about it, so I had to throw it in. All right, so MicroAdjust and fine-tune. MicroAdjust is what Canon calls it. AF fine-tune is what Nikon calls it. Other manufacturers may have similar terms. All right, so when you focus with your camera, you intend it to focus in one certain area. But sometimes the camera, for a variety of reasons, will focus slightly in front of where you intended to focus due to slight errors in the camera lens and/or combination of it. It's also possible that your camera could be back focusing. So whenever you focus on a subject, it's never in perfect focus. It's in focus just a little bit behind. So if you focus on a person's eye and their ear is in focus, it's back focusing. If their nose is in focus, then it's front focusing. And in order to fix this, you can A, send your cameras back to the manufacturer. And this is what we've done for years. And what happens is you send the camera back to the manufacturer, they fix it according to what they think fixed means. You get it back and it may or may not work because you have to match it up with the lenses. The best way to do it is to send your camera and all your lenses back to Japan to have them calibrated. Or you can do it yourself and be done with it. And so this is kind of the idea on how you would do it. What you need to do is you need to have a focusing target. So anything flat to focusing on will work. You then need to measure whether it's front focusing or back focusing. And so what I will do is I'll have this target here, I'll focus on it, and then I'll look down here to see if it's focused back here or up here, because I can see if it's focusing in the right area. Now, if you want to buy a device, if you want something to help you out, you can buy a device like this for about $100. And what you do is you focus on this little area right here. You can see there's lots of contrast, easy for you to put your focusing point. Grab that, and then you can see along this scale what's in focus, what's out of focus, and whether your camera is front focusing or back focusing. I'm a pretty thrifty guy, and that's like $100 for a piece of cardboard. And so how did I do it? Well, I got a ruler and a yardstick, all right? And I focus on the ruler right here, and then I look on the yardstick to see what's in focus. Now, when I actually take the pictures from the camera, this is what they look like. I did a series of 5 pictures that I went in and micro-adjusted, and you'll have different ways of setting it. With most cameras, and my camera, you could set it at 0, down to -20, or all the way up to +20. And you can see where the red line is, the best focusing point has slightly changed. And on the lens that I am shooting right here, it is slightly front focusing with this setting at 0. By setting my MicroAdjust or AF fine-tune to 10, it's slightly behind where it's supposed to be focused. So on this lens, I believe I set it at +5 so that it would focus properly on this camera. And so what you do is you just shoot these pictures, and you can change the setting around and zoom in and play back on the back of the camera and see how sharp it is. Now, how important is this to do? If you have the kit 3.5 to 5.6 lens, don't bother with it, all right? You're getting enough depth of field that a slight shift of a few millimeters is not going to make a big deal. If you have purchased an 85 1.2, an 85 1.4, a 300 2.8, a really nice prime fast lens with super shallow depth of field, and you want to shoot it at super shallow depth of field, well, if you want to get the most performance, you're probably going to need to AF MicroAdjust it right out of the box. And it's not that anything is truly wrong with your camera, it's just that there's some very subtle tolerances that can push and pull lenses in one direction or the other. And in order to do this, let me give you the very, very quick how-to. You're going to need your camera, your tripod, all your lenses, and everything to take really, really stable photographs. I'm using a ruler and a yardstick. You can use whatever devices you want, but those are common and they're easy to work with. You're going to need to have your camera in the shallowest depth of field, so you can choose aperture priority or manual to do that. You want to have the lowest ISO. You want to get the best image quality possible. Very important, you want to have it in single autofocus, so AFS or one-shot mode, because you're going to focus on the subject and you just want to let your camera focus on it. If need be, you should have your camera in the mirror lockup mode, turning vibration reduction off. And then what you'll do, the steps that you'll take, is you need to manually unfocus the scene and then focus on it so that your camera can go kind of from nothing to focus. Make sure your camera's in the mirror lockup mode, fire the shutter, play it back. You don't even need to download it if you have a good camera with a good screen on it. Play it back, magnify it, and compare one picture to the next as you adjust through the micro adjustments. And so this can really help with any of those really high performance lenses. It's fine tuning the high performance lenses. And if you're wondering how much of a problem this is, I have a number of lenses. And I went through and I got a new camera not too long ago. And I went through and I did a micro adjust for all my lenses. And if you want to go through this setup, even if you have one lens, you should probably set aside an hour just to set everything up, take your time and really think about it. It might take you an hour to go through 3 or 4 lenses to make sure that they're perfectly aligned. And there's some nice features in some of the cameras. I know some of the higher end Nikons and Canons can keep track of multiple lenses of the same focal length. Not that a lot of people have that problem, but they can really keep track of a lot of different lenses in that regard. And I have one final thing to talk about when it comes to sharpness. And that is that when you shoot raw images, your cameras need a little bit of sharpness boost when you get them into the computer. And so here's an image that's basically straight out raw image, and let's just take a close-up and look at some different areas. And so by using Photoshop, Lightroom, or other program, it's often good to add a little bit of sharpness. Now, one of the big problems with the early days of digital was people go, sharpness slider all the way. And what happens is that you get this little halo of a black line that looks a little fakey. We call it a little too crunchy sometimes, and it looks a little fake and can be overdone. So you want to be a little bit underhanded and soft and gentle with the sharpness slider on your camera. What it's doing is it's looking at the edge detail and it's making that more contrasty. It's not changing the sharpness, it's changing the edge contrast. So if there's a little bit of a black line and a little bit of a white line, they make it more black and more white so that it's more apparent that there's an edge to it. And so it is something that I do for most of my images before I output them to the slideshow to make sure that they look the way that they're supposed to look. But that's just natural that the raw images need a little bit of sharpening. JPEG images are sharpened in camera, so be careful about sharpening them or double sharpening them because they're sharpened in the camera. You want to be careful about sharpening them again. And when it gets into sharpening, there's kind of another long discussion that pops up that goes more into the world of printing. And we're not going to take questions on that or get into that. And so that is about what? 2-3 hours of focusing stuff. And I'm done with focusing.
Well, not quite yet.
Well, we got the questions. I'm happy to answer the questions. No problem there.
I think the micro adjusting process is really fascinating. I think the people in the chat room are liking it too. And several people have asked about zoom lenses and if micro adjusting works well on those, if there's any caveats that they should know about when working with them.
Well, obvious problem is that you could adjust it at one position, but it's not good at the other. And I've noticed on some of the newest cameras, you can micro adjust at 2 different focal lengths on a zoom lens. So you would set it for a certain focal length and go through the process, and then set it for another focal length and go through the process. And so that it would adjust that. So let's just say if it was +5 here and -5 here, it would kind of slide through, go back to 0, and go back there. And so it may not always be perfect, but it's a way to account for the zoom lenses.
Okay.
KT James Photo is asking from Vegas, do you have different settings on your camera for different lenses?
Different settings. Not really in regards for this. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thanks. Keep it short and sweet.
I'm going to ask this question. I'm not totally sure I understand it. I'm going to hope that you do. This comes from Scatterling, and they're asking, what about focus shift at large apertures?
Focus shift. I don't know what they mean by focus shift.
Okay. So Scatterling, if you're out there,
Maybe
rephrase.
More words.
Yeah, more words would be
More
great.
clarification.
Okay.
All right.
Focus shift, because I'm thinking about tilt shift, but
That's kind of what I was thinking
different.
at the same time, yeah.
Can we go back to mirror lockup? A question about
Sure.
that? All
Perfect,
right.
yeah.
So Frankie from France, so just to confirm, we can't use mirror lockup when hand holding our camera, correct?
You can, but it really doesn't do any good.
Okay.
And so just something else that comes to mind with that, what shutter speed, does anyone remember, what's kind of the critical shutter speed with mirror lockup? There's a particular number that it was like, that's the worst. There was an example, it was on screen, there was a number. It was 1/8 of a second. 1/8 of a second is kind of the worst shutter speed. If I'm hand holding a camera and I'm panning it, I have no problem being at 1/8 of a second. And especially if I'm panning it, that motion is going to be far more apparent than any tiny motion. And almost by holding the camera, you're absorbing some of that vibration. It's when it's on a tripod, it doesn't have that absorbing. And so the mirror lockup is really something you would only use on a tripod.
Okay. I'm going to throw a couple quick ones here at you. Pro Photographer wants to know how often you micro adjust your lenses, and TLAQQANI wants to know, can you micro adjust macro lenses in the same way that you just talked about?
You can adjust macro lenses. There isn't a specific setting for what distance you're focusing at, because it's potential that a macro lens could be on at 1 foot but off at 3 feet. So you have to try to choose one distance that's most important to you. The other question slips my mind. What was the first half of that?
The first one was, how often do you micro adjust your
often?
lenses? Yeah.
Well, I guess the true answer is as often as you need to. If nothing's wrong, you don't need to waste your time going back in there. I suppose you could go back and look after a period of time to see if something has shifted or adjusted, but it's more of an electronic problem and processing program than it is a physical something that may shift in there. And so programs usually stay the same. So it's not very often that you would need to do that.
Okay.
Ron Robertson from LA is asking, do you have to micro focus? Sorry about that, folks. All right, Ron Robertson from LA asked, do you have to micro focus for each lens you own? And what happens when you change the lens?
So yes, you do have to macro adjust for each lens you own, provided that it needs it. And whenever you put a new lens on your camera is very smart. It knows what lens is on the camera. It records it, it understands that it has a new lens, and it will switch over to that micro adjustment if it's different than the previous camera. And that kind of brings one other thing to mind. In many cameras, there is an option to micro adjust all lenses equally or individually. If you found that your camera was off by +2 on everything, you could do that and potentially fix the problem. But in most cases, you're going to need to go in and individually micro adjust each lens. And once again, for most people who have medium to slow zoom lenses, this doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about this. It's really if you're trying to get that very, very shallow depth of field.
Okay. Another great one from the internet. John, at times when you hear the AF beep on your camera and then you look through the viewfinder and your scene looks blurred, how do you know what to adjust?
Okay, first off, I have turned off the autofocus beep on my camera a long time ago. Those are the training wheels that you should take. That's the sticker from the store that you should take off of your sweater. I'm not sure if I should tell the story first or answer the question. Maybe I'll try to answer the question first. First, turn that beep off. Secondly, double check the diopter control on your viewfinder, because if your camera beeps, it thinks it's in focus, and maybe just the viewfinder is out of focus. And so that's what I'm guessing is going wrong. Okay, you ready for the story?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all annoyed by certain little things. The focus beep kind of annoys me. And I was out shooting pictures one time, and there was a bunch of photographers around, and there was somebody there who had their camera. They didn't have a cable release, and they were using the self-timer, which is what I fully support. But he was using a 10-second self-timer, and he left his beeper on. So it was kind of the audio confirmation that his timer was counting down. So you would hear this beep, 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 click, click. And then he would immediately take another picture, beep, 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 beep. And this was going on consistently. He was just constantly taking pictures. So it was like standing behind a garbage truck backing down a street. And I really don't like to confront strangers in that way. And it just driving me nuts, because he was like right in the good spot where all of us were, and it was just annoying. It's like somebody talking on their cell phone really loudly. And I finally just said, okay, I'm going to go up and I'm going to say something. I said, if you want, I can show you how to turn that beep off on your camera. And then I waited for it. He goes, that'd be great. It's been driving me nuts. And not 2 minutes after I get back to my camera, another photographer sets up, beep, 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 beep. And now I have all this confidence that I can go up and talk to people and, tell them how to set their cameras up. And so I go up to him and I say the same thing, and he goes, I know that. Oh, nearly bit my head off. But he turned it off.
That is the perfect story to kind of wrap up today. That was hilarious. You should start charging everywhere you go. It's like on-site consultation. But I think that's the end of today. My brain is completely full. You guys in the chat rooms have been awesome today. Mm-hmm. Everyone here, you guys have had great questions, and we loved how much you interacted in class today. But let's all give John a great big global applause.
All right, so John, believe it or not, is teaching 2 more full days of the fundamentals of digital photography. It feels like it's already been like 80 days of information. What do we have in store for us tomorrow, John?
So tomorrow we have 2 very different sections. We have a long, big section on light. It may be, well, no, it's the 3rd biggest class as far as the number of slides. So there's a lot of different things, just talking about natural light, flash. So we've been talking about flash photography, advanced flash techniques, some cool special effects. And then, of course, less slides, but lots of questions, question time for the gadget section. So we'll be talking about tripods and cable releases and close-up accessories, so a lot of good stuff.
I hope you're going to leave at least 7 to 8 hours for the Q&A on the gadget section.
Yeah.
As soon as you bring up tripods again, you're going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
Well, I want to read you some quotes from the internet, because we've gotten a lot of great comments. The go-to girl says, I love that he is teaching us visually. I do too. She said, this is the way I learn. Show me once and I got it. Make me read it and it takes forever. I'm loving your class, John. Thanks so much. And then Laura's picks. I'm going to go with Laura's picks. I'm still in shock and am truly amazed by how easy this is to tap into, how easy it is to purchase and download, and how completely floored I am by John's instructions and slides. Stunning, all capitals, so you know she's yelling on the internet.
Yeah.
There's one more thing I want to share with you that someone really cool shared with us yesterday. And it's a quote, a reoccurring theme I liked in the review section of John's 2013 course is, John Gringo, the man who taught me photography. And that's a great legacy. And that's from our very own Craig Swanson. It's just like the best quote, I think, of all week. But Craig went on to say, honestly, John is the man who taught me photography too. Not sure how much that says, since I'm still not a photographer, but so much of what I know about photography comes from John's classes. So you have just been a wealth of information for everyone here in Creative Live. All the people that aren't photographers are becoming photographers.
Right. Nice.
For sure. And you guys are watching this free live broadcast of the fundamentals of digital photography. And remember that you can choose right now to have all of this information with you forever and at your fingertips. And these fundamentals, they don't really go away. They're like the basics of photography, that those rules will never change, so that you can continue to grow in your photography and that you will always have the chance to continue to grow and help capture the best image in every moment that you are living. So if you know that this is the course for you now at this moment, then you can choose to purchase this course for the live event price of $99 right now. And then in addition to that, I want to let you know that John, of course, has an extensive library of classes here at Creative Live. And this week during this live event, all of John's DSLR Fast Start classes that are normally $49, they are on a special live event price of $39 as well. And you'll also see on this slide on your screen that he has 2 more Fast Start classes coming up in just a couple weeks. On March 4th and 5th, he will be teaching the Nikon D600 and Canon 6D Fast Start classes. So be sure to enroll for those 2 classes right now so you receive all the important updates before the class starts.
And you know, next week is Photoshop week, and if you're into Photoshop, I'm into Photoshop, and there's so much more I want to learn about it. You should definitely catch that. It's going to be 6 days, 13 instructors, over 40 classes. You're going to be learning Photoshop from the best instructors in the world. Enroll today. It's on the calendar. Make sure you sign up. And you're not going to want to miss our tweet chat today with Dave Cross, Lindsay Adler, and Lisa Snyder, 4:30 Pacific time. Check out the event on our Facebook page. And as usual, we'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. for another full day of Fundamentals of Digital Photography with John Gringo. It's going to be great. We will see you guys tomorrow, and that is a wrap.